strong.
Chapter 81, Madam. In the room, Yu Fuxian followed Hua Jiu behind his eyes. The environment is good. Hua Jiu glanced and smiled. Well, it's suitable for rest. Yu Fuxian nodded. Xi Yjiu walked to the bed, and immediately took off his jacket, revealing a perfect and sexy curve, and then turned and smiled at Yu Fuxian and said, "Does it look good?" Yu Fuxian blinked. How did it feel? This scene seems familiar, which makes Yu Fuxian have a bad feeling, but nodded honestly, handsome. Then I rest, you watch. Hua Jiu smiled playfully, walked to the bed to take off her shoes, then lay down, folded her arms under her head, and looked at Yu Fuxian with a smile. That's my bed, should I be able to sleep too? Yu Fuxian looked at the sleeping beauty in front of him, without such temptation. You try. Hua Jiu smiled. Yu Fuxian faced bitterly, and said badly, "Fairy, you did this wrong." Xie Hua Jiu stretched his waist lazily. That touching posture made Yu Fuxian very hurt. I fell asleep. Hua Jiu said with a smile, then turned to Yu Fuxian and covered the blanket. Yu Fuxian didn't see it this time, only a looming curve. Yu Fuxian wants to cry without tears. This fairy, he must take revenge fiercely. Lifting his steps gently, Yu Fuxian walked to the bed, then sat on the ground, and said softly, "Fairy, is it warm to sleep with me?" Hua Jiu liked it. Today's battle is a bit expensive. I want to lie down and rest. The ground is a bit cold, or should I lie down? Yu Fuxian said to himself, still ignored. Don't worry, I won't touch you, I'm lying next to you. Well, if you don't talk, I will assume you are the default. Yu Fuxian muttered silently, then got up from the ground and sat on the bed, seeing that the flower commentary was still not moving, so he lay beside him, saying, "It is really comfortable." A moment of silence. Yu Fuxian's eyes flashed and whispered, "It is very fragrant. Does the fairy smell on you? It smells good." Hey, why are you feeling a little cold? It's better to cover the blanket. Yu Fuxian said, gently pulled the blanket, slowly pulled it himself, and then the two lay down in the blanket. At this point, Yjiu's face returned to him already red, as if he could shed tears, his clear eyes flashed, and at this moment, he could even feel Yu Fuxian's body. Temperature. How does it feel? A little cold to cover the blanket. You are not cold, fairy, I just hugged you. A voice came, and then the interpreted arm felt his arm around his waist. Very soft, but it made him tremble. Didn't he just lie beside him and didn't touch him? How cold is it? Fairy, why is your body shaking? Is it too cold? So I hugged her tightly. Someone's voice sounded again, then Hua Xiu felt the body being held tightly. At this time Hua Xiu's face red halo spread to the ears and neck, dripping. Don't bully me, Yji said softly. Yu Fuxian heard this gentle voice, the smile in his eyes was full of tenderness. He tightly hugged the young girl in his arms, felt her scent, leaned his hair against his nose, felt with his eyes closed, softly said, "How can I bear to bully my fairy? Wait for me marry you." Well, I was waiting for you. Hua Jiu nodded gently, her trembling body gradually calmed down, and then she closed her eyes, with a sweet smile, and gradually fell asleep, as if very peaceful. Fairy, I have to marry you. Yu Fuxian felt the temperature in the arm of the peerless beauty in his arm, said in his heart. I just enjoyed the warmth between the two. Everything that happened in front of Zibai Palace spread wildly, and it was introduced to the ears of everyone in Donghai Zoo Palace in no time. As a disciple of Qin, Yu Fuxian destroyed the painting of Zhou, a sage disciple, and then blocked the door of Zibai Palace. Together with the rest of his life, he challenged the two 8-star strongmen who boasted mightily in the Tianfu Palace and harassed them. Then, Yu Fuxian announced that Donghai Zugong's first beauty, Hua Xiu, was his girlfriend. The two hold hands in front of everyone and announce their relationship. Niu Yongxuan, a genius in Zibai Palace's glory field, jealous, hurt and insulted Hua Xiu, Yu Fuxian crowned the crown, launched a life and death battle, defeated him with a very powerful move, and then restrained the talented Zhao Xiangsuo Xiang Ling cut Niu Yongxuan in front of Zhu Qiang's Zibai Palace. The Donghai Zugong 7th Palace shook, and countless people were amazed. The young genius who entered Donghai Zugong this year is so strong that if it is a few years later, I am afraid that it will be even more terrible than that year's piano demon. At dusk, Yu Fuxian's room was quiet and warm. I don't know when, Hua Xiu fell asleep facing Yu Fuxian, and his body lay still in Yu Fuxian's arms. At this time, I saw Hua Jiu's beautiful eyes opened, and her long eyelashes were very beautiful. He looked at Yu Fuxian and said, "You can't wake up yet." "No, I want to sleep until dawn." Yu Fuxian smiled. "The beauty you desire, rest during the day, and practice well at night." Hua Jiu got out of her arms, then got up from the blanket, and sat there, her hair a little messy, adding a little flattering. The meaning is very beautiful. Fairy, I really want to eat you. Yu Fuxian whispered. Hua Jiu's eyes flashed, then she blushed slightly, but smiled sweetly. then give it a try. I'm really trying. Yi Fuxian was a little excited to move, his claws gripped Wajiayu. Then Yi Fuxian saw beautiful slender legs stretching towards him. The next moment, his body rolled up, and then rolled under him. Killed a husband. Yi Fuxian woke up in depression, walked down from the bed and looked at him with a smile, showing a hint of pride. Fuxian. At this moment, there was a voice outside. It was Yi Qingshuan's voice. Yi Fuxian was a little depressed. Why did he call her at this time? Sleep, Yi Fuxian responded. Fuxian, come out immediately. Yi Qingshuan kept shouting. Yi Fuxian stood up reluctantly, thinking what happened to Qingshuan girl. Are you in Ziyu? At this time, a cold voice came from outside, and Ziyu's body froze, and then he showed a panicked expression, blinked at Yi Fuxian, straightened his long hair, and got dressed. Who? Yi Fuxian asked weakly. My mum. Hua Jiyu suppressed the voice very low. Ah. Yi Fuxian was petrified on the spot, then quickly jumped up, something bad. After a while, the two walked out of the room and saw a few figures outside. Yi Xiang was there, but standing far away. The person standing in front of Yi Fuxian and Hua Jiyu was a beautiful woman. She was only about 30 years old and very beautiful. She was full of mature beauty all over her body. Who's that? No wonder Hua Ziyu could be so mean. The figure standing in front of him must have been young and beautiful when combined with his handsome teacher, and girlish face one could imagine. After all, apart from himself, Yi Fuxian has not seen a man whose face value can be compared to a romantic flower. Mother. Hua Jiyu shouted weakly. Yi Fuxian looked at Yi Qingshuan next to him. Why didn't the girl call him earlier? Mother-in-law. Yi Fuxian then looked at the beautiful woman in front of him and shouted kindly. Tong Nan Duwenyan glanced at Hua Jiyu's slightly messy hair, and then looked at Yi Fuxian. There was no emotion in those deep eyes. Yi Fuxian seemed to be waiting for the trial. In the face of the teacher's wife and fairy birth mother, Yi Fuxian's arrogance at this time also lost his temper. Qingshuan, let's go first. Yi Xiang shouted. Yi Qingshuan and the rest of his life nodded, and followed him to leave, so here only Yi Fuxian, Wajiayu, Nandu Wenyan and standing behind him Nanduan Mountain. How's your teacher doing? Nan Duyan suddenly said, without questioning anything, but about the situation of flowers and romance. Her voice is very crisp and delicate, making people feel very comfortable. The teacher is very good in kindergarten, but he always misses him, Yi Fuxian said. It's only natural that Tang Lan takes care of him. Nandu Wenyan calmly said that Yi Fuxian was shy and women who wanted to be jealous were all the same. Teacher doesn't want to stay, but now it's hard to move and needs people to look after him. Aunt Tang insisted that the teacher agreed. On the first day I came to Donghai City, teacher took me outside Nandu Mansion and pointed to me and said to me Madam live there, and he wants to see it. Yi Fuxian said. Nan Duan looked at him with a clear look, not like lying. Then Yi Fuxian discovered that Master's eyes were much gentler when he looked at her. Tong Nan Duyan looked at Hua Jiyu and asked, do you like her? Well Tilda nodded heavily. I was the same as your father back then, but you also saw the end. Won't you regret it if something happens in the future? Nandu Wenyan said again. Chi Hua Jiyu's head. Stupid kid. Nan Duan's voice was gentle and he sighed quietly. He looked at Yi Fuxian and said, do you want the Nandu family to see it by challenging the relationship between Zibai Palace and society? Mother-in-law, I didn't say that the Nandu family would also guess, so I had to guess. Yi Fuxian whispered softly. You are more arrogant than your teacher. Nan Duyan looked at Yi Fuxian and said, I want to take XEU back. Mother. Hua Jiyu looked at her mother. Tong Nan Duan didn't bother and still looked at Yi Fuxian and said, come and sit at home tomorrow. Yi Fuxian heard Nan Duan's words and was stunned, then smiled, and said, thank you, madam. There was also surprise in Yanhua Jiyu's beautiful eyes. It seems that the mother is not against it. Little man, good talent. At this time, Nandu Wenshan behind Nandu Wenyan came forward and smiled at Yi Fuxian. Senior, you remind me of that day in King Luo Palace. Yi Fuxian asked. After excluding the Han dynasty in Zibai Palace, he always wondered who reminded him. At this time, he saw Nandu Wenshan and he suddenly became cheerful. Why, are you so hostile towards the people from the Nandu family? I am XEU's relative. Nandu Wenshan looked at him. Oh, Yi Fuxian smiled and nodded, and shouted, Yi Fuxian has seen you. Shameless enough, Nandao Wenshan cursed with a smile, and then the two left with Hua Jiyu. When Zun left, Hua Jiyu was still staring at Yi Fuxian, reluctantly. Chapter 82, Zhu Pei. After Zunhua Ziyu left, Yizhang returned to the courtyard. Going to Nandu's house tomorrow? Yi Xiang asked. The palace lord won't hear any more, will he? Yi Fuxian looked up at Yi Xiangdao suddenly. You speak so loudly, you need to eavesdrop. Yi Xiang said faintly. Yi Fuxian's face is black, can this also work? I'll take you to tomorrow, Yi Xiang said again, and Yi Fuxian smiled. The palace master really treats me as a disciple. Don't think too much. Your teacher kidnapped one of my students and is still obsessed with it. Now I listen to you for the rest of my life, so you are still alive. Yi Xiang said quietly, then turned around, and Yi Fuxian was silent for a while. She understands very well, Yi Xiang admires her very much, but her mouth is loud, her emotions are too smelly, and fortunately she is not her daughter-in-law. You really want to go? Yi Qingshuan looked at Yi Fuxian, his eyes always felt like he was in a tiger's den. My sister-in-law called me to leave, can it still harm me? Not to mention, I have a left-handed order, the Nandu family will not dare to do anything in the family if they want me to die, and your father will protect you on the road. Something happened. Yi Fuxian could see it very clearly. Yi Xiang said that Zhao Xiang was favored by the king of the Nandu kingdom today. Hua Xiang took control of the soldiers and horses and then he fought them in the room, because even Zhao was very gentle in front of him, but so strong. Those figures should be very dignified on the outside. The last time he came to the East China Sea Academy, all the great figures in the 7 palaces would worship. Be careful then, Yi Qingshuan ordered. Yes. Yi Fuxian nodded, and the rest of his life said, I will go with you. I will see my wife-in-law what you are going to do, and accompany your wife-in-law. Yi Fuxian looked at him intently, and looked at Yi Qingshuan next to him for the rest of his life, scratched his head and said, oh. When Yi Qingshuan saw Yi Fuxian talking about his daughter-in-law for the rest of his life, he turned red and ran away. All my life, seems to have one, great. Yi Fuxian smiled for the rest of his life. Not. The rest of his life trembled with a smile, turned and left, and saw the back of his departure. Yi Fuxian smiled, this man, how can he still stun? Ah. The next day, the Nandu family, the residents of this 100-year-old prince-emperor, showed a kind of solemnity. Hundreds of years ago, the founders of the Nandu kingdom came out of here and were the true prince figures. Since then, the Nandu kingdom had no descendants to achieve the past achievements of the ancestors until it weakened and walked on the throne. Outside the palace house, 2 figures appeared here. Yi Xiang personally sent Yi Fuxian to this side, and said, I will wait for you at the outside door. He was the master of the Wakir Palace of the Donghai Zugong Palace. He had nothing to do with the Nandu family and naturally didn't enter. He was worried that Yi Fuxian would be on his way before sending him personally. After entering the Nandu family, he didn't have to worry about his safety. Yi Fuxian nodded slightly, then walked forward, looking at the prince's residence in front of him, with a slight wave in his heart. On the first day he came to Donghai City, the teacher took him to the door, and he told himself that he would conquer this princely residence in the future, so that the teacher could come in and take a beautiful woman. Since his relationship with the fairies was revealed earlier, he had a crossroads with this prince's residence before. With a slight smile, Yi Fuxian lifted his steps and walked towards Nandu Shijia mansion. The guard seemed to know who he was, and he didn't stop, letting him enter directly into the mansion. A straight path leads to the depths of the mansion. Yi Fuxian stepped forward, and there were people in the mansion flickering, seemingly reporting. After a while, Yi Fuxian found that many figures appeared on the street. They were all young people. Most of them looked at Yi Fuxian with hostility, and some people were curious. They all knew that the man in front of him was a disciple of Demon Keen. His master kidnapped Nandu Wenyan, and now he has kidnapped the best woman in the Nandu family. Talent and appearance are unique flowers in the Nandu family. Interpretation. Under such circumstances, even if I hear that Yi Fuxian's talent is so dazzling, many of the descendants of the Nandu family are still very unhappy. Of course, some young women complain that this man is really handsome. No wonder Hu or Ziyu likes him, maybe not just because of talent. In Fufu, I saw a beautiful figure running. After seeing Yi Fuxian, a bright smile appeared in his eyes. He came to Yi Fuxian and stopped, watching him gently. You are here. Yes. Yi Fuxian smiled. Hua Jiu smiled sweetly, then stretched out his hand, holding Yi Fuxian's hand. This was his attitude and also told the Nandu family of his determination. Yi Fuxian's heart was warm. He knew how much courage this young girl needed, held her hand tightly, and the two walked forward side by side. This scene made many people look ugly. This jerk, they are the best women in the Nandu family, only held by him. Not only the characters of the younger generation, as they move forward, many of the elders' faces are a little unsightly, but there is nothing to stop them. It was said that they had been standing side by side in front of Zibai Palace. It doesn't mean to stop them now. Let's decide. Ziehua Ziyu took Yi Fuxian into the courtyard. Nandu Wenyan and Nandu Wenchen are here, and a family banquet is prepared. It seems that inviting Yi Fuxian to come today is Nandu Wenyan's own meaning. Master, uncle, Yi Fuxian shouted. Come and sit down. Nandao Wenchen smiled, Yi Fuxian nodded, and the two came to the table and sat down. I hear they all know. Nan Duyan said to Hua Ji. Well, there are a lot of people along the way. Hua Ji nodded gently. Let's eat. Nandu Wenyan said, the purpose of being here, and inviting Yi Fuxian to the Nandu family was to show his attitude. At first, he was forced to separate from Hua Fengliu, and now his daughter had taken the same path as him, but he hoped that his daughter would have a different ending than him. Xie Hua Jiu helped Yi Fuxian to pick vegetables. Yi Fuxian smiled gently and tasted calmly. Then he looked up and said to Nan Duan, "The master is very skilled in craftsmanship." Nan Duan Yunmei looked at Yi Fuxian and said, listening to his comments, "His father really likes you. After seeing you, I understand why you and him are the type of people. Maybe he looks at you as if watching for his own reflection." Tongnan Duanshan also smiled and said, "It's true that he and Fengliu both have faces that a woman can't ignore, and it's no wonder that Ziyu girl is as deep as her mother. That teacher is much better than me." Yi Fuxian said right and wrong. In front of the teacher, of course, he had to give his teacher enough face. "No, you are even more arrogant than him." Nan Duan looked at Yi Fuxian, and before the age of 17, he dared to announce in Donghai Zugong that the woman was a flower translator, which was not something ordinary people would do. He knows how good his daughter is. Everyone saw that he would be ashamed of himself. Yi Fuxian was better, and before the age of 18, he dared to announce that Waji was his, and he also slashed the genius of Zibai Palace in public. Also better than him. Nandu Wenshan added, "Yi Fuxian, thank you." Yi stared at the sky for a moment and looked at Nandao Wenshan. "You don't know how Mandarin sounds all these years. It's the same as the dead walking all day, until he finds out that Hua Fengli returned to Donghai City. She has vitality. After seeing you in Luo Mansion, I guess your reconciliation. Maybe the relationship was unusual, so he told him that he was watching you back then. Yesterday was also the first time he left the Nandu family for many years." Nandu Wenshan said with a smile. Yi Fuxian looked at Nandu Wenyan, thinking that the relationship between teacher and teacher is so deep. "Madam, I will treat the fairy well in the future, and I will ask the teacher to come to the Nandu family to pick you up." Yi Fuxian said. "Where do you call this fairy?" Nan Duan glared at Yi Fuxian. Yi Fuxian smiled awkwardly. Waji Yume looked at him, and said, "Mother, the first time this bad guy saw me was my first year entering Kingshu Academy, and he said that Loli was 12 years old. Fairies in a few years." Tong Nandu Wenyan's brothers were stunned, and then Nan Duanshan laughed and said, "So dishonest at the age of 12 it turned out to be really blue. I wasn't wrong." Yi Fuxian muttered awkwardly, looked at Hua Jiu, and saw that Hua Jiu was looking at him with a smile and a little joy. "Wenyan, I heard that you are better." At this time, there was a sound that came from far outside the courtyard, and then many footsteps sounded softly towards this side. Tongnan Duyan looked out of the courtyard. After a while, they saw a group of people walking around, led by Nandao Tai, the head of the Nandao family. He was standing beside Nandao Tai, and Nanduku was standing there, his eyes looking at Yi Fuxian, with a very sharp look. "Uncle!" Nandao Wenshan stood up and shouted. "Hem." Nandu Tai nodded, glanced at Yi Fuxian, and then smiled. "You are Yi Fuxian's romantic disciple. I've seen my predecessor." Yi Fuxian stood up and said, "No matter what the relationship is, it is not polite. The hero is still young, and I heard that you are invincible in front of Zibai Palace. You must be favored by the left side, who is better than your teacher." Nan Dutai said with a smile. "It's not too good to say that the love of flowers is not good now. If you have the opportunity in the future, let him also come to sit in the Nandu family." Yi Fuxian was a little surprised. How could the Nandu family speak so well? "Unfortunately, he said that he is a good friend of reconciliation." "What does that mean?" "Uncle." At this time, I saw Nanduan standing up and looking at Nandao Tai. Xiu is almost 17 years old, and now there are people who like him, and they are in love. I plan to assign Xiu to Fujian first, settle this family relationship. What is uncle thinking? Chapter 83, Someone is Coming. Tong Nanduyan's words fell, and Hua Jiu and Yi Fuxian both looked at him, seemingly very surprised. "Mother-in-law wants me to interpret Ziyu to me." Yi Fuxian's heart flowed warmly, and today was the second time he saw it. Of course, he also understood that the mother-in-law would make this decision mainly because of his teacher as well as his feelings for Xiu. His talent was second. Nandu Wenshan was also a little surprised, but then he could understand that he regretted himself for a lifetime and naturally didn't want Xiu to go his own way. Now that Yi Fuxian has shown the brilliance of the times and is favored by the left, and the Nandu family will also consider, he wants to take this opportunity to settle things, so as not to change in the future. He let Yi Fuxian come to the house yesterday, and may have already decided. Luan Dutai and others looked at him, and someone said, "Wenyan, this is a bit rash." Yes, although he showed strength in Donghai Zugong, but what about it? Maybe the people in Zibai Palace are too weak. There are many talented people in my Nandu family. For him, many people started talking about it, and saw that Nan Duanyin wanted to match the Nandao family's best descendants with Qin Mo's disciples, and many people who were here were immediately unhappy. "Wenyan, you heard it too. Xiu is still young, so don't rush it," Nandao Tai said. just to settle the family business first, and not let them get married now. Nandu Wenyin insisted. In fact, even at Wajiayu's age it was not unusual to marry someone still too hasty. Nan Dao Tai shook his head. Xiyu's father is Fu Tian's teacher, so naturally I have no opinion. I am Xiyu's mother, and I agree with that. Xiyu and Fu Tian are also in love with each other, so why not talk carelessly? Nan Duyan's voice was only slight. Not happy. Tong Nan Dao Tai gradually sank and looked at Nan Duyan and said, so, Xiyu's marriage has nothing to do with the Nan Dao family. Uncle's meaning is that Xiyu's marriage should be decided by the Nandu family, has nothing to do with me as a mother. Nandu Wenyin asked, my parents are no longer around, my uncle has interfered in my life, now, I am alive, and my uncle is ready to interfere with Xiyu's marriage again. He knew something about the Nandu family wanting to get married back then, so he didn't allow the Nandu family to do the same to Xiyu. Wenyin, rude. An old man scolded, did you talk to the owner? Miss Wenyin, because she is a disciple of Demon Keen. Nan Duku said coldly, Miss didn't reach the expectation, now you want her daughter to finish it. Xie Fusion's eyes looked to the south, and this person was the one who followed the goblin to Kinyuan that day. He also said that he was not as good as Zhoumu's holy disciple. Arrogant, how can you talk? Nan Duwen rang a cold drink for Nan Dao. I know that Miss Wenyin has an honorable status, but her ancestors are of the same bloodline, inheriting the best bloodline, and so is Miss Xiu. For this reason, Miss Xiu's marriage cannot be taken lightly, even though Qin Mo's disciple has shown some talents, but what about it? There are so many geniuses in the world, but I have a lot of Nandu family, but Miss Wenyin never seems to think about it. Nandu Ku responded nonchalantly. Yi Fusion's eyes flickered, listening to Nandu Kuan's meaning. Nandu Wenyin was probably the strongman who founded the Nandu country at that time, so he inherited the best blood. In this case, Nandu Wenyin and Wajiayu were indeed considered to be daughter figures of the Nandu family. Yes, the battle at Takaizu Palace represents nothing. I want to teach him his strength. At this time, a junior figure from the Nandu family came out and looked at Yi Fusion. What about the battle? Yi Fusion glanced at each other lightly, ignoring outright. What do you mean? The man looked at Yi Fusion coldly. Back off. Nan Dao Tai said lightly, then the junior character retreated into the crowd. Nan Dao Tai continued, Wenyin, since your parents left early, I have to take on family responsibilities and take care of all right guys. I know you hate my uncle, but now in the end, I am willing to let it go, and even in a few years, I can consider reuniting you with flowers, but Zayu's marriage is up to me. How about you? Are you only thinking about romantic matters now? Nandu Wenyin looked indifferent. Now, Xiyu's exhibition reveals his unrivaled talent, which the Nandu family is eagerly waiting for. In addition, Yu Fengtian's disciple, who is also a romantic, is also evil and favored by the left. Nan Dao Tai also knows that certain things are bound to come and cannot be changed, unless Nan Dao Tai strikes with reconciliation and kills Qin Mo's disciple. But as it turned out, both were difficult for Nandu Tai. I will break off Zayu's marriage. Nandu Wenyin did not compromise, and he would never let his daughter fall victim to the Nandu family's interests again. Proud. Nandu Tai laughed coldly. The stronger the surrounding Nandu family gathered, the more they stood behind their owner. At this time, Yu Fusion clearly found that the original Zayu family seemed so lonely in the Nandu family. The noblest pulse of a family, but now, it is an isolated pulse. Madam, let Lord Nandu think about it again. I don't have to worry about hasty appointments. Yu Fusion said at this time. In such a situation, the Nandu Wenyin and Nandu families were not a wise choice. What he wanted was time. Tong Nanduyan looked at Yu Fusion, and then saw Yu Fusion embarrassed at him. Madam, Xiu, I will go back first, and see you again if I have the chance. He said. He looked at Nan Dao Tai and said to them again, sorry. Then, he walked outside, and the people of the Nandu family gave up, and several junior characters satirically said, we can afraid to fight, I think it is fame. I heard he was really angry at the East China Sea Academy, and now it seems he is. Yi Fusion just smiled a little, and didn't care to care. At this moment, what is the importance of fighting the younger generation of the Nandu family? After he left, Nandu Wenyin was still dealing with Nandu Tai. Wenyin, calm down, Nan Dao Tai said. No, this is my attitude and will not change, Nandu Wenyin replied coldly. Tell your sister. Nan Dao Tai looked towards Nan Dao Wenshan, then walked away. Many people left, and when Yi Fusion left the Nandu family, many people challenged and ridiculed, and seemed to have opinions about him. He ignored them and left with Yi Xiang. Nandu Wenyin frowned after they left Nandu Tai and whispered, in the past, he wanted to use Hua Xiang and I to improve relations. Now that Yi Fusion is favored by the left, why will he not agree to this marriage? Because Fu Chan is that his disciple. Tongnan Duan Mountain also frowned, and Nandu Tai seemed to be very resistant to this matter. Mother, I forgot to tell you something. At this time, Hua Jiu behind him said, "On that day, the owner invited Zhao Xiang to come and count my fortune." Zhao Xiang agreed, and he said, "I have the Fate Emperor. Luck." Nan Dao Wenshan looked carefully, and said, "Left phase, he is an astrologer." Ha! Hua Jiu nodded. Nan Duan's eyes were fixed on it, and then he looked at the Nan Duan mountain road. "What do you think?" "No wonder His Majesty has always believed in the left, as well." Nan Dao Wenshan muttered, "I have seen the introduction of astrologers in ancient books. Astrologers are very rare, they have the ability to predict the number of lives, but they will be affected by strength. Because of Zhao Xiang's strength, what he called queen might be some kind of honorific title, maybe the queen. Besides, astrologers only measure the number of lives, but can't predict the future, and the estimate of the number of lives can't be changed." However, Nan Dao Wenshan did not know that when the left phase measured Hua Jiu's number of lives on that day, he did have doubts, but when he heard the word Hua Fuyu asked Yu Fusion, he would say the queen's life. There is also some speculation about the number of lives of the left phase. Hua Jiu nodded calmly. She also believed that the number of lives could be changed. After returning to the East China Sea Palace, Yu Fusion began to retreat and concentrate on his spiritual practice. Even if he had shown enough talent and issued an order, the Nandu family still fought him and Hua Jiu together. In this way, he only had one way to become strong enough without the Nandu family's approval. He waited until early next spring, and he went to Nandu King City with the elves to attend a wind party and heal his teacher's wounds. Time passed day by day. Yu Fusion never left Wuke Palace, and his strength was increasing every day. East China Sea Palace. Since Yu Fusion blocked the battle, instead of inciting contradiction, it became more peaceful. Zibai Palace and Tianfu Palace no longer provoked Wuke Palace. On the day Yu Fusion blocked the gate, the two palaces were gone. Face. Maybe there is no face to continue to trouble the Wudi disciple. Of course, the people at Takai Academy also didn't think that Zibai Palace would be like that. Maybe this is the peace before the storm. Currently, there are many rumors circulating in Donghai Zugong Palace, namely that Zibai Palace wants to unite Zugong Palace instead of the 7 palaces side by side. Unknowingly, at the end of the year, it was almost a year before Yu Fusion came to Donghai City. His cultivation broke through to the 6-star glory world, and the master realm was the same as the martial arts. However, he did not stop his practice steps. The state of glory is too weak, and it is not enough to see in Nandu. He hopes that he can enter the realm of law as soon as possible so that he can have a foothold in Nandu. When Yu Fusion was practicing quietly, all the big figures from the 2 palaces in the Zibai Palace of the Tianfu Palace came outside the gates of the East China Sea Academy, including the 2 palace masters. At this time, there was a commotion in the East China Sea Academy, and everyone was guessing. Who do they welcome? What kind of character really needs a strong lineup to welcome? Finally, a mighty figure descended on the beast, and the momentum was better than the arrival of Zhao Xiang. Chapter 84, Hero Gathering. Library latest novels upcoming rating category Chat Indonesia. Home TLOF Fusion Legend, Chapter 84, Gathering of Heroes. The Legend of Fusion. Chapter 84, Hero Gathering. Previous. Next, Table of Contents Arrangement. This line came to the East China Sea Academy, with a strong aura. The first 2 people had a middle-aged and a young person. The middle-aged man was wearing a silver-white robe, shining brightly. His eyes were extremely noble. When he glanced at the crowd, he felt a natural sense of majesty, like a powerful figure with his life-killing power in the palm of his hand, standing there leisurely. It gives people a sense of majesty. The young man's temperament was even more extraordinary. His eyes were like stars, and his body was full of sharpness, as if no one in this world could stand in his way. Look at Hua Xiang. People bowed to worship. Even the main figures of the 2 palaces, Zibai Palace and Tianfu Palace, worshipped in the same way. Bian Zhongnian was the noble figure of Nan Dao Guo. His majestic eyes looked at the people in front of him, then he pointed to the youth next to him. "This is your highness." The strong people couldn't help but tremble. When they saw the extraordinary temperament of this young man, they felt something faint. Now when they heard Hua Xiang's words, they only confirmed that the young man in front of them was today's legendary southern nation-state prince. Now there are many children of His Majesty Nandu State. However, the heir to the throne had been appointed early, and no prince could compete for the throne with today's Prince Luo Junlin. His name is King's Landing, like the name of betrayal, but it is a gift from His Majesty, which means King's Landing, and we can see how much he loves the prince. Everyone in town and Daoguo knew that Prince Luo was coming, and it was the next generation of kings. No one will doubt this. See your highness. The respects of the princes are very respectful. I didn't expect that His Majesty even came with Hua Xiang. In this case, the overall situation is established. Luo Junlin nodded arbitrarily, then stepped forward, and walked forward. The strong people in the 2 palaces gave way. "Master, let's go." Hua Xiang stepped forward and said to the main palace of Zibai Palace. Brother, please. The owner of the Zibai Palace said politely, and the group walked towards the East China Sea Academy. Soon, news of the arrival of Southern Prince Duguo Luo Jun spread throughout the East China Sea Academy, and the powerful people of the seven palaces went to meet each other. Even though Wakir Palace was now at loggerheads with Zibai Palace, Yu Xiang had also left. Only the palace lord. Today, Prince and Hua Xiang are here. The East China Sea Academy is making waves, and the East China Sea Academy that has been calm for so long, is the storm finally coming? Zibai Palace and Tianfu Palace were low for a few months, apparently waiting for this move. It seemed they had started planning all of this from the start. After seeing the prince, the palace master descended from the Zibai Palace and returned to the palace. Then, the message spread throughout the Tokai Academy. Shi Hua got orders. He wanted to see how the East China Sea Academy disciples were training. He ordered a meeting of the seven palaces to be held 3 days later. His Majesty and His Majesty will personally observe the ceremony. As soon as this news came out, the East China Sea Academy suddenly boiled over. Everyone felt vaguely that Hua Xiang and Prince Edward's goal was not in the Seven Palaces Congress. There is a deep meaning behind it. I'm afraid it has something to do with the rumors circulating at the East China Sea Academy recently. Zibai Palace, dissatisfied with the situation of the seventh palace of the Tokai Academy. Yi Wushan Palace, in the courtyard where Yi Fuxian lived. At this time, he is practicing piano music. Apart from making piano art more sophisticated, it is also a spiritual practice. For the past few months, he had been practicing retreats without asking for foreign affairs. At this point, Yu Xiang came here, and after the song ended, Yu Fuxian looked at Yu Xiang, saw that the other person's eyebrows were frozen, and asked, Master Gong, what happened? Yu Xiang nodded. Wakir Palace may no longer exist. Yu Fuxian's expression calmed down and he just listened to Yu Xiang continue. Hua Xiang and the current Prince Luo Junlin recently came to the East China Sea Palace, went straight to Zibai Palace, and ordered the Seven Palaces Conference to be held 3 days later. King Lin standing nearby, and the situation at the East China Sea Academy cannot be stopped. What is the palace master's plan? Yu Fuxian did not comfort him. Since Yu Xiang said so, it means that he can't change anything. At the beginning of the seventh palace of Tokai Zugong, it was Zonman's nature, but in fact, it has become more and more diluted and closer to the real Zugong, and even more so in the Wakir Palace. After being changed back to the ancestral gate, if so, I will not stay. I will let you know, since the general situation worked out, Zibai Palace reigns alone, and you will definitely not be able to stay in the academy. If you leave the academy, Hanmo might deal with you, Yu Xiang said. Yu Fuxian naturally understood that I wanted to practice calmly and wait until the spring of next year to go to Wangcheng, but I didn't expect that the East China Sea Academy would suddenly break out. It's okay, there are seniors who are afraid of something. I have a left-handed sage's orders in hand. As long as you don't provoke him, Hua Xiang can't deal with me personally. Yu Fuxian smiled. If there is no reason, Hua Xiang is also impossible to tear the face directly with the left. Your son is intelligent, train quietly, don't worry about the 7th Palace Congress, and you don't want to participate. Yu Xiang instructed. Yu Fuxian nodded. He naturally understood that the 7th Palace Congress was not a famous time. In the next time, the news of the 7 Palaces Congress not only spread to the East China Sea Academy in a short time, but also spread to Donghai City at a terrifying speed. In addition, many great figures in Donghai City were invited to attend, and Zibai Palace played a voice, welcoming all characters in Donghai City to come to Donghai Zugong to witness the ceremony. This made everyone in Donghai City realize that there would be a big event at Donghai Zugong. The East China Sea was boiling. In the streets and in restaurants, many people were talking about the 7th Palace Conference of the Tokai Academy and talking about the legendary prince. Many people wanted to see for themselves how extraordinary this prince was. It was said that he was a young man at the pinnacle of the French nation, his talent was unmatched, and it was rumored that his life and soul were twins. As a king, his destiny was destined. The rest of the princes didn't even have the courage to fight for power with him. They only dared to praise him. In the future, he will become a calm king, and no one will dare to hate him unless he wants to die. If such a character descended on Donghai City, one could imagine what kind of sensation it would cause. For 3 days, the moment passed. On this day, the sun was shining, and many people in Donghai City gathered outside the Donghai Academy, and wanted to go to the academy to observe the ceremony. The arrival of a big man in Donghai City, the audience saw that many big people brought their children, especially their daughters. The goal is clear, although the hope is slim, but if there is a chance to be seen by the prince today, then it is possible it is the queen of the future mother-in-law world, and now there is no prince or concubine. Lin Ziyu also came today. He came with his father and entered the East China Sea Academy. Her beautiful eyes looked at this academy. He trains at this academy. He didn't know what was happening now. Lin Ziyu doesn't know much is happening in Donghai Zhugon. Yu Fuxian is now famous in Donghai Zhugon, but his reputation is still limited to Zhugon, except that he and his family always pay attention to Hua Ziyu. He told a few things, so he knew what happened to Yu Fuxian. The other big names in Donghai City obviously wouldn't pay attention to some of the youngsters in the school. Some of the younger disciples were training at Donghai Zhugon. They learn it from their mouths, but they don't preach it everywhere, lest they offend the master of the painting. You won't miss him, will you? Xiao, he asked with a smile beside Lin Ziyu. What are you talking about? Lin Ziyu looked at him. That day was really handsome in King Luo Mansion. Xiao, he giggled. Lin Ziyu smiled and nodded. The King Mansion of Luo Mansion that day was indeed dazzling. Zhou Mu is also training at the East China Sea Academy, and I don't know if the two will collide. Xiao, he said again. Is it Zhou Mu? Lin Ziyu muttered, wondering if she could beat Zhou Mu now. However, even if they no longer stand out, they are not as good as His Majesty today. Will you be guarded by His Majesty so much? Xiao, he said with a smile. Lin Ziyu was too lazy to care about this girl and followed her father. Proceed to enter Tokai Zhugon. In the other direction, Mu Yunqing and Mu Yunyi brothers and sisters accompanied Mu Hong's father, only to see Mu Hong say with a smile, Donghai Zhugon is indeed a gathering place for talent, full of enthusiasm. When you are here, how is son's performance at school? Fortunately, I have put in the effort to practice, Mu Yunqing replied. Well, that's good. Mu Hong nodded. His Majesty will come to witness the ceremony in person. If there is a chance today, you should do well. Okay, Mu Yunyi replied, but the two brothers looked a bit strange. In fact, their experience in Donghai Zhugon this year was very bad. This has something to do with someone, but they don't even tell their father's face. Thinking of the many outstanding people in this academy, me, Painting Master, and Kinmo all came out of this academy. Mu Hong reminisced, and said with a smile, Donghai City's paint scene has long been famous, but Kinmo has been abolished, and I don't know where my friend is now, and what about the disciple? I thought that when Kinmo and his disciples wanted to worship under the door, a touch of irony appeared on his face. Today, the heroes are gathered, and figures such as painting sages must be high, and Kinmo is still unknown. In Zibai Palace, this is another situation. Chia Feng, the head of the Donghai government, knelt on the ground, and Hua Xiang and the prince sat in front of him. If it was normal, Chia Feng would not be like this, but now he is in trouble, and only Hua Xiang can save him. Why did Zhao Xiang kill you? Hua Xiang asked. Because of Qin Mo's disciple. In the past, the Holy Brother was very beautiful, and the Qin demon was dead. Now his disciples have come to Donghai City, arrogant and arrogant. I want to kill him and blame my son. Chia Feng cried and faintly dimly knew that the sage painting and Hua Xiang had a relationship, so he naturally knew what to say. Philosophers outside held orders, and cut off the Zibai Palace disciple. I want to meet him. At this time, Prince Luojun faintly opened his mouth, and Hua Xiang said, 7th Palace Conference, I can see this son since then. Luojun nodded, then stood up and said, let's go. He came to Donghai City during his journey, not for the Zibai Palace of the Donghai Zoo Palace, but because of the left phase. In recent days, the left phase has been somewhat active. Chapter 85, 7th House Congress. Donghai Zoo Palace, countless people gathered towards Zoo Palace Central Square. In the 7th Palace, it became much quieter. Yi Fuxian and the rest of his life did not leave, but in the courtyard. But at this time, Yi Xiang came. In addition, not only Yi Xiang, but when he saw the people behind him, Yu Fuxian was embarrassed, and then he smiled and said, Teacher, Aunt Tang, why are you here? You asked Tang Wan to tell me what she brought, and I heard that there will be big changes in the East China Sea Academy now, because I want to see what the East China Academy of Sciences looks like at the end. Tang Lan said, when Yi Xiang told Yu Fuxian to Tang Lan Yi Fudian to Tang Wan told Tang Lan. I saw Tang Lan look at the rest of her life and said, in the future, will you be my teacher? Yu Sheng smiled thickly and shouted, brother. Yu Fuxian felt something wrong. This relationship seems to be a little messy, so isn't it a generation older than me for the rest of my life? No, everything is different. Tang Lan glared at him. I heard that you are very arrogant after entering the East China Sea Academy, crossing the Luo King's mansion, playing Zhou Mu, killing Zibai Palace Tianzhao, and going to the Nandu family. Beautiful. Yi Fuxian trembled with a smile. The teacher and Tang Lan could not help but watch Zugong's movements. See your brother-in-law. Hua Fengliu asked. Well, teacher, madam never forgets you. Yi Fuxian nodded, then he felt something wrong. His eyes turned, and then saw Tang Lan smile at him. Yu Fuxian shivered, immediately shut up, be a man difficult. Take me to meet your teacher. Hua Fengliu replied. Yu Fuxian glanced at Yi Xiang, only to hear Yi Xiang say, the 7th Palace Congress will be held soon, I will pass, now Zibai Palace should be empty. By now, you and your disciple should be able to go up. Okay. Yi Fuxian nodded his head, stepped forward and brought the flower wind. The wind spell descended, wrapped his body, and then the two corpses were empty. In the void, Hua Fengliu asked again, your brother-in-law, how is he? Well, everything is fine except for missing you. After seeing me, I said that the teacher has good vision and accepts such good students. Yi Fuxian smiled. He did not tell the teacher what Nandu Wenshan had told him. The teacher knows that in these past years, the sister-in-law is living like a corpse, and it will be very uncomfortable. I haven't seen her for a few days, my face is thicker, so I haven't been kicked out of my house in front of your brother-in-law. Hua Fengluo said weakly, and he was used to Yi Fuxian's helplessness. How is it possible? When I left, my sister-in-law said that I had to match the fairy with me. Yi Fuxian said. Is that true? Hua Fengliu asked. Teacher, did you think I would make such a joke? Hua Fengliu smiled and said, I believe, love House and Wu. It seems that my mother-in-law's affection for me is still the same as that year. What is I Wu and Wu? Am I too kind? Can you always be more narcissistic? Yi Fuxian said to himself, this is too embarrassing, right? The reason why the maid likes herself, loves the house and the black one. You don't have a point in your heart. Hua Fengliu's voice was so cold. Yi Fuxian admitted, teacher, it seems that I will never be able to surpass your parents. Of course, he refers to the degree of narcissism. Don't be arrogant and can destroy Zhou and prove that my eyesight is still fine, Hua Fengliu said with a smile. It's not easy to earn your praise. So you are still very satisfied with defeating Master Zhou. Yi Fuxian laughed. Very cool. Flowers responded lightly, and Yi Fuxian's face showed a bright smile. There was no way to heal the teacher's injuries, and at least he did something for the teacher. In Zivai Palace, in the courtyard where Qin Lao was, when Yi Fuxian and Flowers came here, he only listened to the melodious voice. Qin Lao played the piano alone. 10 of his fingers were calloused, but his fingers were amazing and stable. With grey hair and soft and gentle, he doesn't seem to know that someone is coming and playing quietly, as if the whole person is immersed in the sound of a piano. The crickets sounded soft and gradually subsided. As the strings vibrated, the old man stopped, and then he rolled his eyes, smiled at Yi Fuxian and blossomed with a smile. Congratulations, you're here. Qin Lao smiled kindly, and Hua Fulu, supported by Yi Fuxian, bent his knees, and then knelt on the ground, scratched his head against the old man, and his head sank to the ground. When Zhu raised his head, his eyes were bloodshot, and his voice was hoarse. Disciples are unfilial, so I haven't been able to see you for many years. When I first saw Qin Lao worshipping under his door, Qin Lao was very energetic. Even when he left, Qin Lao was not the same now. I don't expect to see my teacher again in other years. The oil lamp can run out at any time. Congratulations, wake up. Qin Shao's voice was serious. Hua Fengliu scratched his head again, then stood up with Yi Fuxian's help, and said, students meet teacher's expectations. You, my teacher and disciple can meet again in this life. I am very satisfied, there is no need to say this again. Qin Lao laughed again, and said softly, after all, I really like Xiu and Fuqian. The two little guys, everything is good, Fuxian's talent is better than you. Wu Huiliu laughed and said, this kid's talent is fine, but his temper is bad. Didn't he anger the teacher? How can Fuqian be better than you? Qin Lao looked at Yi Fuqian with a smile and said, he and Xiu are also very good. You and Wenyin should support him more, don't let them go your old ways. The disciple understands. Hua Fengliu nodded, glanced at Yi Fuxian next to him, and saw Yi Fuxian's proud smile, and Hua Fengliu glared at him. Fuxian, Qin Lao looked at Yi Fuxian again and said, I am old, and I can't do much. Your teacher's injury depends on you. Master, rest assured, as long as I live, I will find a way to heal the teacher. Yi Fuxian nodded seriously. Stupid boy, don't say bad words, of course you will live well. Qin Lao looked at Yi Fuxian. Master has the final say. Yi Fuxian nodded with a smile. Master should also take care of his body. I will marry Ziyu in the future. You will be a witness. Okay. The old man laughed very well and nodded non-stop. Teacher, you must have had a bad time at Zivai Palace this year. Hua Fengliu looked at the old man in front of him. It is better to leave here with the disciples. Mary, your teacher has spent most of his life in Zivai Palace. How can Zivai Palace change? But after all, I am still a person in Zivai Palace. I am almost on the ground, where I can throw. Qin Lao shook his head with a smile. Master, Donghai Zugong is afraid that it will change soon. Are you really not considering leaving? Yi Fuxian also suggested. After hearing his words, Qin Lao's eyes looked into the distance. Although he did not come out, he also knew what was happening in Donghai Zugong, and secretly sighed. Yi Fuxian was chatting in Zivai Palace. Many figures from East China Sea Palace gathered in the central square. At this moment, the place was packed with crowds of grandstands all around, and the most prominent figures of the 7 palaces were sitting in the center of every direction. In addition, there were many family figures in Donghai City. He who is qualified to sit has an extraordinary identity. But no matter who they were, most of them converged on the same recipe. The direction of the subject, that is, the position of the strong man in Zivai Palace. The figure walked to the top position. He stood there casually, but looked like an emperor on earth, looking at the crowd. His bright eyes were transparent, with a glimpse of the atmosphere overlooking the world. Beside him were Hua Xiang, the owner of Zivai Palace, and Xia Feng, the owner of Donghai Prefecture. Is it Prince? How extraordinary and powerful, the emperor is born. Everyone looked at Luo Junlin. His temperament was too extraordinary. People found it difficult to approach. The gas field was too strong. Countless figures stood up one after another and bowed towards it, shouting, "Meet His Majesty, and see Hua Xiang." Luo Luojun's eyes are very calm, without waves, sweeping over everyone. He said lightly, "Sit down." I said. He took a seat first, and then everyone took their seat. They knew that the young man sitting there at this moment would become the king of Nandiguo and take over the world. Luo Luojun was not only distinguished, his temperament, appearance, and talent were all as dazzling as his identity. Countless young women's eyes shone brilliantly. What was vaguely expected. His Majesty's temper is too much better than Zhou Mu's. Lin He Yue whispered to the Lin family, and the best young man she had ever seen was the disciple of the painter Zhou Mu. The saint painting predecessor was there, and Zhou Mu was also there. He looked at the figure next to the main body of Zivai Palace. He was a painter, and Zhou Mu stood quietly behind him. Lin Ziyu's beautiful eyes looked at the crowd, as if looking for something, but they didn't see it. He trained in the Wakir Palace, but the disciples of the Wakir Palace did not see him. I saw that at this time, in the direction of the Zivai Palace, the vice principal Han Mo stood up and took a step forward, only to see his hand raised up, and suddenly the sound of the vast space calmed down and gradually calmed down. Your Majesty and Hua Xiang came to my Donghai Zugong Palace. This is a glory that I have not had in the history of Donghai Zugong Palace for more than 300 years. After a few years, what happened today will be included in the history of Donghai Zugong Palace. Han Molang said, His Royal Highness the Prince and Hua Xiang have high hopes for me at Tokai Academy. Therefore, holding the Seven Palaces Congress today, I will have the opportunity to give my students a chance at Tokai Academy's 7 palaces. Show your talents up front. Prince's Hall. Everyone's eyes flickered and they had a mind of their own. Before Yi Fuxian blocked the door, Zivai Palace and Tianfu Palace often provoked other palace disciples. Maybe they are building momentum, but Zivai Palace did not expect that all of this was broken by Yi Fuxian. Now, taking advantage of the Prince and Hua Xiang's arrival, Zivai Palace launched the 7th Palace Conference, and its purpose is no secret. Of course, there were still many people who could have the opportunity to appear in front of Prince Edward and Hua Xiang. After all, for ordinary students at Tokai Academy, whether the 7 palaces at Tokai Academy are juxtaposed or combined, it has nothing to do with them. Chapter 86, How Much Hatred. Han Mo's eyes looked at the people with a smile on his face. Today, Zivai Palace will be in charge of the East China Sea Academy. Just listen to him continue. Of course, because I have a large number of students in Tokai Academy, everyone can only have the opportunity to show their strength. I hope that today, my outstanding students at Tokai Academy can take the opportunity to release the light themselves. There is one more thing. Today, Your Majesty and Hua Xiang must see the true style of my disciples in the palace. When we discuss battle, we don't need to defend it. Therefore, it is inevitable that one will be injured in battle. It is a will standard to bear the risk of battle. Han Mo's words made many people look stagnant. On weekdays, the Zugong East China Sea battle is always updated, and the situation of war, death and disability will never be allowed. However, at this time, Han Mo's meaning seems to make Zugong today. The disciples disengaged and fought, in which case, some uncontrollable situation would likely occur. I won't say much. Next, give my disciple at Tokai Gakuin 7th Palace some time. Han Mo backed into his chair with a smile, and then sat down. For a moment, this space was a little quiet. There was a large open space in the center of the square, which would become the stage for the East China Sea Academy disciples to show their talents, as well as the battlefield. After a moment of silence in the space, people saw a figure walking in the direction of Zivai Palace, and saw his disciples from the 7 palaces all staring at him. Zhuo King, a disciple of Zivai Palace, was the first person in the field of law in the East China Sea. I saw Zhuo King walking slowly to the center of the square. He stopped and looked in the opposite direction, where the Wakir Palace was. Zhuo Wei disciple Zhuo King, who was cultivated for the 9-star glory world, challenged the glory disciple in Wakir Palace, please tell. Zhuo King spoke calmly. Many outsiders didn't know the situation, but the people in Donghai Zugong knew it. This is the revenge that Yi Fuxian blocked the door. He was only in the direction of the Wakir Palace. He didn't look at Yi Fuxian. He did not come to the 7th Palace Conference today. The people in Wakir Palace were not very handsome. Duo King himself was the pinnacle of glory. There is nothing to be proud of when disciplining the glory of a disciple, but adding 2 words makes the Wakir Palace very shameless, but noble. At the environmental level, I am afraid that it is difficult for someone to beat Duo King. For the rest of his life, Zun moved his body and wanted to get out. He is now trained to enter the 6-star glory level, but he can fight. Yi Xiang stopped him. The attack and strength of the rest of his life are not afraid of the strong people in the world of glory, but he still has flaws. Unlike Yi Fuxian, who also built various abilities, Duo King had a strong mental attack and super control. He could defend the sky, which was slightly fatal for the rest of his life. No matter how strong the attack was, he might not be able to hit the opponent. After the rest of his life reached the realm of law, his strength would change. At that time, he will be able to fly in the air, and then he can help train the body. Is there no one in Wakir Palace? Duo King smiled slightly, seeing that there was no movement above the Wakir Palace. At this time, the figure of a Wakirong disciple stepped out and came to the opposite side of Duo King. Yang Teng, 9-star glory, please tell me, said the Wakirong disciple. Help. Duo King smiled coldly, then her body was suspended, her eyes became very strange, and her body headed towards Yang Teng. Teng stepped on the ground and stepped out, rushing towards Duo King like lightning, his body stepping in the air. In Duo Qing's eyes, a terrible sharpness bloomed, and an invisible mental storm descended on Yang Teng and rushed to his mind. Then, Yang Teng only felt that his body seemed to be out of control, and he walked in the air while his body fell. Duo King can control other people's bodies with great and strong mental strength. Everyone saw this scene, his heart trembled, but Yang Teng was also very strong. He shouted angrily, and released the physical force into his body. Take control and land steadily on the ground. But at this moment, Duo King descended onto his body, looking at him with strange eyes. At the same time, endless vines shrouded Yang Teng's body. It was Yi Fuxian who was in front of Zivai Palace. The wood attribute spell used, Cheeto Lock. Yang Teng's aura was violent, and he wanted to condense the spell, but a mental storm came, and he was surprised to find that the aura around his body seemed to be out of his control. Locking her body, quickly tying her tightly. Duo Qing's body slowly descended, her eyes were still staring at the struggling Yang Teng, her eyes were still strange, and then, Yang Teng only felt the sharp wooden thorns between the vines pierce his body. The intense pain made him scream. A crackling sound came out, the vine became extremely loud, twisting its joints. Yang Teng's whole body was deformed. He was somewhat regretful. He shouldn't have given birth to the idea of challenging Duo King. Duo King is stronger than rumored. Bang! I saw Duo Qing's footsteps fall in front of her. The next moment, the crackling sound continued. Yang Teng was locked towards the Wakir Palace by the vines. A strong man in Wakir Palace caught his body. Everyone saw that Yang Teng's arms and legs were deformed, and he was curled up there in great pain. Put him down for treatment, Yi Xiang said, and he looked at Duo King in front, only to see his eyes return to normal, smiling, offended. After not saying anything, he turned around and returned to the crowd of Zivai Palace. Many people felt a chill. Duo King took a shot and hit the Wakir Palace disciples directly. Palace Lord Zivaigong passed down his disciples, and it is truly extraordinary. Someone from the family sighed admirably. They were too general about this situation. In the future, I will definitely become an East China Sea character. Many people praised, and the owner of the Zivai Palace smiled slightly. Duo Qingji is not here. He will be going to King Nandu City next year to participate in the listening banquet hosted by His Majesty. Yes, with Duo Qing's talent, when you can show your talent while listening to the party. Someone laughs and praises, and as for the losers, they are never asked. He was on the battlefield for the rest of his life while he spoke. He turned his gaze towards Zivai Palace and said coldly, for the rest of his life, the world of 6-star glory challenges everyone in the 7-star glory of Zivai Palace. The chatter and laughter ended suddenly, and countless eyes stared at the burly figure. 6-star glory, challenge everyone in Zivai Palace's 7-star glory. Is this crazy? There he is. Lin Ziyu glanced at the rest of her life, and the rest of her life was furious, but how could she not see Yi Fuxian? Isn't this the boy who came to our house with Keen Demon in the past? This person has a problem in his mind. Niu Hong asked his brother, Niu Yunqing, the brother and sister in the direction of the greedy palace. Niu Yunqing and Niu Yunyi blinked, thinking that that person might have such a pervert. At that time, he was in the 5-star glory state, and no one in the 8-star glory state dared to fight against him. Now he is in a state of 6-star glory. The strong person in the 7-star glory world is afraid that he can't completely destroy his defense. If he is on the battlefield, he can sweep everything away. Father, the strength is fine. Niu Yun said weakly. Niu Hong nodded, his eyes turned to the rest of his life. Because that was the case, then take a look. Arrogant, I am Zivai Palace alone enough to fight with you. I saw a Zibai Palace elder said, and then ordered a disciple beside him to go to battle. The Zibai Palace disciple stepped forward with his head firmly. When he left, he looked at the rest of his life with a bit of fear. Many people in Donghai Zugong understand that this is sent by Zibai Palace to the rest of his life. The fact is the same. When the rest of his life was given, he punched the person head-on with one punch, and then threw the opponent back towards Zibai Palace. He looked cold and looked at Zibai Palace, despicable. He said, he returned to Wakir Palace. It really has power. Mu Hong was slightly surprised, feeling the scene in front of him a little strange. He asked Mu Yun lightly, where are the disciples of Qin Mo, also training at Takai Academy? Mu Yun nodded slightly. How strong is that? Mu Hong asked. Ziyu Wei should be comparable to me now. Mu Yunqing said, she only said Ziyu Wei, not strength. That's also good. No wonder flowers will be sent to our Mafu. It seems that there is still some talent. Mu Hong said lightly. Furthermore, the battle continued, and the disciples of the 7 palaces each came out to show their strength. But one person who came to watch the war today saw that the Wakir Palace seemed to offend a lot of people. Zibai Palace, Tianfu Palace, and Greed Palace all weakly targeted them, making the disciples of Wakir Palace very sad and often suffering. When challenged, they continued to be defeated, with very few victories, and many disciples were cruelly treated. With the appearance of the holy disciple Zhou Mu, the atmosphere of the 7 Palaces Congress has also been pushed to the top. Zhou Mu has now gone further, stepping into the 7-star realm and challenging the 8 stars in the Wakir Palace. Person, well, it's worthy of being the sage of the painting, and the summon beast that is drawn it will is stronger than the actual monster. Someone praised. Sure enough, there was a painting style in the past, and there was no comparison. Many great figures praised him. At this time, 2 figures stepped into the crowd. Yafushan took Keen Demon to find the direction of Wakir Palace, and then squeezed into the crowd. Yafushan did not intend to come, but the teacher wanted to see. After today, the East China Sea Academy may no longer became the East China Sea Academy, and there would be many people who knew him today. The applause suddenly exploded. Yafushan looked up and looked forward, and saw Zhou Mu summoning a beast to defeat the opponent. Many people looked in the direction of Wakir Palace. Today, the disciples of Wakir Palace were defeated very badly. Brother Lu. At this moment, someone saw Yafushan take Hua Fengliu to the top position of Wakir Palace. Someone shouted suddenly. Qin Mo Hua's love has also appeared. Is that the student? Many people started talking. Yafushan was slightly speechless, and said depressingly, Teacher, you are too proud. That's called reputation. The flower echoed softly, Yafushan Fu. Ha ha, today's disciples are showing off their unique style. It just so happened that Brother Lu showed up with his students, so why not talk about it and see if disciple brother can have some painting styles. The speaker is Mu Hong. When the words fell, countless Donghai Zugong eyes stared at him, and many people looked like fools for a while. This man, how much he hates the painter, wants to hit the painter's face like this. Chapter 87, Roll Call. A few months ago, what happened in front of Zibai Palace was a sensation in the East China Sea Palace, and no one knew. Yi Zhumu was crushed and defeated by Yafushan in a disgraceful manner. It can be said that it indirectly hit the painting master's face. No one dared to mention it in front of him. However, at the time of the 7th Palace Conference, this Mu Hong actually said such words in front of everyone. It is conceivable knowing how the people at Donghai Zugong feel, especially the expression, look at Brother Fengliu's disciples who have paintings. The disciples are rather charming. Where does this place Hua Sheng's face? Many people did not dare to look at the painting, for fear of being noticed by the painting. This fool. Many people in Zibai Palace stared at Mu Hong coldly. The greedy people of the Wolf Palace also looked at Mu Hong. These boys have been slapped by Yafushan. He doesn't even know. Jian Mahong saw countless eyes staring at himself, thinking of drawing a battle between Sant and Qin Mo, but did not expect such an influence to this day. Perhaps many people hoped for their succession. It is a pity that Hua Fengliu is so humble now, like a mourning dog asking for help. His disciples are naturally not worthy of being compared to the intelligent Zhou Mu. Father. Mu Yunqing and Mu Yunni's faces were all green behind him. They did not expect Yafushan to appear suddenly. Father spoke the words again. This is for painting paintings and Zibai Palace. Do people mention death? Yafushan also looked at Mu Hong with a stunned look. He had deep memories of this man. After all, she was the first time he had met after entering Donghai City. However, he even said this on such an occasion. I glanced at Mu Yunqing behind Mu Hong and Mu Yunni's brother and sister. Yafushan showed a cute smile. The 2 brothers and sisters didn't really sue their father, maybe they were embarrassed. The predecessor is good. Yafushan suddenly smiled at Mu Hong and said, in the past, when I saw the predecessor, I felt that the predecessor was noble, and the children were between the dragon and the phoenix. When I entered the Donghai Zugong Palace, I was known as the genius wolf disciple in the Wolf Palace. Teaching, may be very good. Bian Hua Fengliu blinked and looked at her students with a speechless face. Could this be more shameless? Unfortunately, why was he expecting something now? Not only him, the disciples of Donghai Zugong looked at Yi Fuxian for a moment. This person stepped on the first day of Donghai Zugong. It was said that the people who were affected were Mu Yunqing and Mu Yunni's brothers and sisters. What kind of hatred is this? Is this Mu Hong? Although the brothers and sisters of Yunqing Yunni are not talented, they are talented, and they deserve to be the best. Mu Hong smiled confidently. His daughter Mu Yunni continued to pull her clothes behind her. Lo Chan, don't stop talking. Ha! Mu Hong raised an eyebrow, leaning his head, slightly confused. This is truly extraordinary. When I entered Takai Academy on the same day, I was taught. Both inherited the life and soul of their predecessors. They have excellent talent and they inherited the style of the predecessors. Yi Fuxian smiled, and many faces in the dark Takai Academy. This person. Shima Hong smiled and looked at Mu Yunqing and Mu Yunni, saying, why didn't you hear this from the two of you? Yun Mu Yunqing's two brothers and sisters felt embarrassed and very embarrassed. Then Mu Yunni looked at Yi Fuxian coldly. This bastard was clearly intentional. Seeing the expressions of the brothers and sisters back then, Mu Hong seemed to have realized that something was wrong, and asked, how was the battle that day? Yi Mu Yunqing and Mu Yunni lowered their heads, and Yi Fuxian hated it. When I saw this scene, how could Mu Hong still not understand what was going on? His face suddenly turned green, knowing that he had fallen into Yi Fuxian's suit. Turning his gaze away, he looked at Yi Fuxian again, squeezed a smile, and said, it really is a disciple taught by Brother Luli, who seems to be an extraordinary talent. These two incompetent people are also shameless and dare not face me. When come to this matter, in this way, the painting disciple style has been seen. At this time, I want to see how outstanding the disco disciple is. Why should we satisfy everyone's curiosity? Yi Fuxian smiled and looked at Mu Hong. This old man, won't he be so cute? Father. Mu Yunqing also shouted, and at this time, a cold voice came out of Zibai Palace, saying, are you enough? Sima Hong looked at the Zibai Palace for a moment, and then he saw a lot of cold eyes. Zhou Mu on the battlefield had been watching him nonchalantly. When he walked back towards Zibai Palace, Mu Hong's eyes were still very cold. The last battle was the most humiliating battle, but at this time Mu Hong was actually repeatedly mentioned. What did he mean? Zhou Mu had the urge to hit people. Shima Hong looked at the eyes of the people in Zibai Palace, and noticed that Zhou Mu was looking at him, and he couldn't help it. What happened? I admit that my students are not as good as romantic disciples. After the last defeat, I also allowed Zhou Mu to concentrate on his training. Brother Mu repeatedly brought up the discussion over and over again. What do you mean? At this moment, an indifferent voice came out. Everyone shivered. He who speaks is a painting sage. Bian Mahong's eyes condensed directly there, and his heart twitched violently. At this moment, he understood why everyone would look at him, and then he understood the meaning of Yi Fuxian's smiling, non-smiling eyes. Zhou Mu, a holy disciple of the painting, had played against Qin Mo's disciple and was defeated. The corner of his eyes fluttering slightly, Mu Hong glanced coldly at his two children. There was an urge to slap them both to death with a slap. The two jerks didn't tell themselves a bit about Yi Fuxian. Look at the eyes of the painting sage and the people of Zibai Palace. He knows the consequences of that sentence. Brother Hua, don't blame me, I didn't know this before, it was never intentional. Mu Hong apologized and pleaded guilty. This idiot, slap. Everyone stared at him in silence. Su Huisheng turned his gaze nonchalantly without looking at him, causing Mu Hong's mouth to twitch, then his cold gaze turned to Yi Fuxian. Yi Fuxian is somewhat innocent. When he came, he knew nothing. Mu Hong jumped out in one sentence and offended people. What can he do? Of course it was for Mu Hong's face. At this time, many unsuspecting outsiders looked at Yi Fuxian, and Qin Mo's disciple even beat Zhou Mu, a painting master. Mi Lin Ziyu's beautiful eyes continued to stare at Yi Fuxian, and smiled. I didn't expect him to become stronger after entering the East China Sea Academy. Initially, he was slightly inferior to Luo Wangfu, but then he defeated Zhou Mu. Xiao He was also a little surprised. Continue. Han Mo said coldly, apparently not wanting to get involved. Zibai Palace is prestigious today, but Yi Fuxian's existence is like a thorn, but Mu Hong's miscellaneous accounts have been proactively provoked. Mu Hong's words indirectly made him lose face. There are disciples in Zibai Palace, and the 7th Palace Conference continues. Yi Fuxian and Qin Mo sat in the position of Waker Palace and looked at him calmly. He knew that Zibai Palace was targeting Waker Palace. He had anger in his heart and regretted the abomination of Zibai Palace. Even if he shoots, he is only able to fight one battle does not help. In terms of overall strength, Waker Palace was eaten by Zibai Palace. Qin Mo looks at the disciples of Zibai Palace, and he misses the situation of practicing in Zibai Palace. Unfortunately, things are different now. Many people in Zibai Palace are acquaintances. Now, nothing is right. Looking at him, the figure of the genius painting sage who was as famous as himself was completely different. Nostalgia. Tang Lan said next to Qin Mo, seeing his expression. Don't make fun of me. Hua Fengliu smiled bitterly at Tang Lan. In the former Donghai Zhu Palace, you were a man with a noble character, and nostalgia is normal. Tang Lan looked forward, and she also remembered the years that she had practiced, not only the flowers, but also the painting sage, Nandu Wenyan, and her. They were all talents from the East China Sea Academy. I've only always regretted what the teacher's character was like, but his descendants never truly revealed Qin Yinxi's style until he was defeated and expelled. Hua Fengliu sighed. Tang Lan nodded. Qin Lao really did it. This is commendable, but Fuxian Yi's fame in front of Zibai Palace has caused some regrets for you. Flower Mary nodded gently. Time passed a little, dusk approached, and the sky was red, and extraordinarily beautiful. Sometimes, the East China Sea Palace looked up at the sky. This bright sunset seemed to say goodbye to an era. Isn't he even planning to take a shot? Lin Ziyu Maimo kept an eye on Yi Fuxian. Today's Qigong conference, he did not intend to take the shot. Yi Fuxian was able to defeat Zhou Mu, obviously with tremendous strength. Gradually, no one stepped into the battlefield anymore, and the characters from all sides whispered. Someone laughed. Today's 7th Palace Conference of the East China Sea Academy, Zibai Palace has the most noble style, and includes the 6th Palace. Tianfu Palace is also good. Although it is slightly lower than Zibai Palace, it can become the 2nd Palace of Donghai Zhu Palace. At the same time as this voice came out, everyone understood that the next 7 Palaces Conference, I am afraid that it is really a topic. In the direction of Zibai Palace, Han Mo showed a faint smile, but he saw Prince Luo Junlin facing Hua Xiang. That man hasn't seen the shot. Xiang Huazhang nodded slightly, and then whispered in the main ear of Zibai Palace. A strange color appeared in the main eyes of Zibai Palace, but still nodded, then stood up and said, flower style. In the direction of Wakir Palace, the flower looked up in surprise, looked at the owner of Zibai Palace, then smiled and shouted, meet master. Zibai Palace nodded and said, you were my disciple in Zibai Palace, but now why are you sitting in the direction of Wakir Palace? I'm just following my disciples today. My disciples are Wakir Palace disciples, so they're here, Hua Fengliu said calmly. Therefore, I will not say anything. Today, His Highness the Prince and Hua Xiang came in person and wanted to see the outstanding style of my disciples at the East China Sea Academy. Your students are talented but not out of battle. What is the purpose of Zibai Palace? Street, everyone is a bit strange. The owner of Zibai Palace actually wants Yi Fuxian to take the initiative. However, many people have hopes, because the disco disciple beat the painting disciple. They also want to see how extraordinary this young man is. Yi Hua Fenglu Yi and Yi Fuxian felt a little strange. At this time, Yi Fuxian saw Tang Lan come forward, holding Guqin in her hands. Do you deliberately made it? How can Qinmo disciple not have Qin? Tang Lan said weakly. Yi Fuxian smiled at her. Aunt Tang was ready. I hope to seize this opportunity today. Let the name Qinmo be forgotten by Donghai City. Yi Fuxian smiled and nodded, carrying Guqin alone. Today, let's play a song for the teacher. Chapter 88, One World. Yi Fuxian stepped out slowly, came to the center of the square. Countless eyes were on him, and the younger generation naturally didn't need to say more. Yi Fuxian has proven his strength, and the older generation is also worried. Qinmo now that he has returned to Donghai City as a garbage man, how talented are his disciples. I saw Yi Fuxian put Guqin alone in front of him, then sat down slowly. At this time, he was wearing white clothes, his temperament was extraordinary, and Yushu was blown away. Lin Ziyu's beautiful eyes stared at Yi Fuxian's figure, took a deep breath, and was slightly turbulent. He once thought that he was just a more ordinary person and went to see Luo Luofu. However, Yi Fuxian showed his strength in the World War I exhibition. Today I heard that he had studied in the East China Sea. Gong defeated Zhou Mu, so how good was the handsome figure in front of him? Father Lin next to him glanced at him. In fact, he knew the news of Yi Fuxian's defeat of Zhou Mu, but he did not tell Lin Ziyu that this girl seems to be interested in the boy, and Yi Fuxian is Qinmo's disciple, and offended the painting sage and Zibai Palace again. In the future, the road is afraid of twists and turns, not to mention, he already has a girlfriend, but the Nandu family, he doesn't want his daughter to fall into it. Increased sadness. Yi Mahong also looked at Yi Fuxian, but his eyes were a little gloomy. Yi Fuxian looked at the sunset in the sky, a smile appeared in his clean eyes, and he slowly said, this song is my own, song title, Hero. As the sound of the words fell, he saw his hand stroking the piano, his fingertips slipping on the strings, and melodious music slowly leaking out. He doesn't challenge anyone, he just plays piano music. People's eyes flashed. However, today's goal was to see outstanding disciples display their talents. There was no need to challenge his talent. For the piano devil, piano music is a means of expression, naturally no problem. Soon everyone didn't think much of it, and after a while, Qu Yusheng made their mood beautiful. Wu Qian was first and foremost intelligent and bright. With the sound of the piano in their ears, an image appeared subconsciously in their minds, as if they saw a handsome boy, with the heart of a child, worshipping the teacher to study. The talent of the youth is extraordinary, loved by the teacher. His true biography, in the end, is revealed. The melody gradually becomes elegant and gentle, changing people, making people feel the heartbeat, that is the feeling of love. Everyone subconsciously replaced the mood, and the teenager who was studying slowly grew up. He had a woman he loved, fell in love with, and could feel his heartbeat in the music. The smooth and gentle tone is constantly changing, becoming low and heavy, and the relationship is resisted, as Qianfu pointed out. Some big people frown. Is the mood expressed by the tone itself, or is it the teacher? Wu Can's voice changed again. Once the teenager grew up, he was famous, but he still wanted to be with his beloved woman, even if everyone in the world was against him, even if it was no longer possible. Wu Can's voice gradually became louder, and the protagonist in the music seemed to be fighting against fate, facing everything alone, and in the end, he failed. Wu Qinyan became lifeless, like a late hero. Just when everyone thought that the piano music was coming to an end, the deadly piano music was brought back to life, no longer vibrant and strong, but calm as water, like mood swings, and everyone seemed to see the protagonist in the music experiencing the vicissitudes of life. Self-cultivation, but still I miss the homeland of the deceased, until I revisit the homeland, face the changes in the world, calmly face it, and defeat the hero too. When the notes stopped beating, the notes gradually disappeared, but everyone seemed to be lost in the mood and couldn't get out, especially the young people, especially the piano voices, which seemed to have a beautiful magic. In the direction of the Wakir Palace, Tang Lan's eyes were slightly moist, and her gaze stared at the flowers that had been left beside her. The handsome face had a faint smile. This man is even able to compose his own piano music. And play his life. Many big men looked at Yi Fuxian. They naturally understood the meaning of Qin Yin's mood. This is a piano song for Demon Qin. He used Qin Yin to show his master's life. Although he didn't fight, but this song comes out, it has already surpassed Qin Mo by many years. Who dares to hate? Jian Mahong's eyes narrowed and he looked at Yi Fuxian. No wonder Hua Fengliu begged him for this disciple. Of course, it was another Hua Liu. Who is this song for? At this time, Prince Luo Junlin, who was sitting on the main seat in the direction of Zibai Palace, asked. Go back to your majesty, play for my master. Yi Fuxian lowered his fingers, looked up and smiled at Luo Junlin. The atmosphere is enough, but the spirit is not enough, and there is no real piano sound magic in it. Since you have such piano skills, you can play a song for me today. Luo Junlin said. Yi Fuxian saw this. Prince, since the other party said so, he couldn't refuse, he couldn't help but nod. Okay, I can't make piano sound magic yet, it's just the song of my predecessors. Okay, Luo Junlin nodded weakly. Yi Fuxian lowered his head, stroking the piano again with both hands. The fingertips trembled, the strings trembled, and the tone cracked, like a thunderbolt, majestic. This song, world. With Yi Fuxian's words falling and the notes beating, suddenly, everyone felt the momentum of swallowing mountains and rivers. The eyes of many people flashed sharply. This son is just a genius. Once a song was released, everyone would understand that this song had to be made for Prince Luo. A terrible piano storm sounded around Yi Fuxian's body, as if the waves were turbulent and powerful. At this time, in people's minds, when the piano is played, different images appear. There are wolves and smokers, and the emperor goes to the battlefield to conquer the quartet. There are also kings who ride dragons, explore the world and worship people. After a while, the scenery was very beautiful. Go to a few people. Luo Junlin said faintly. Hua Xiang looked at the owner of Zibai Palace, and then, many disciples in Zibai Palace stepped out and walked towards Yi Fuxian. However, their steps were extremely difficult, and the sound of the piano continued to float in their ears, making them feel afraid of confrontation. Aura around their bodies met and continued to step forward, but at this time, the sound of the piano was still rising, as if breaking through the clouds, and the clouds were straight up. Fuxian at this time seems to be covered with a holy luster on his body. It's not like a young emperor. Hit him, it represents the world. A shocking image appeared in the minds of the scorpions, as if they saw a faint figure standing tall, wearing the emperor's robe and crown, stepping towards them step by step, ordering the world and giving them a feeling of surrender. I looked at the disciples of Zibai Palace, and as they walked towards Yi Fuxian, some people in a weak state were not strong enough to lie on the ground, did not dare to look up, and gently bowed to Yi Fuxian. Then, several people consecutively knelt on the ground under the influence of the piano sound storm, as if under the control of the piano sound, worshipping the emperor. Boom! Several prominent officials flashed sharply, feeling the young man's attitude at this time, and there was a wave of violence in their hearts, and they felt something was wrong. This world was played by Prince Luo Junlin, but the person who played it was Yu Fuxian himself. At this moment, he was like a high-ranking emperor, not forever. Prince Luo Junlin faced him, and the two looked at each other. What's more, at this moment, the disposition of exquisite elegance expressed by the white boy really has the trend of the emperor. Naturally, was this brought to him by Qin Yin, or was he born? Lin Ziyu's beautiful eyes were stunned. For a time, Yu Fuxian was more brilliant than the one he played in the Luo King Palace that day. He has no match. He can also be compared to his character. Qima Hong also made waves in his heart, and Demon Qin was so romantic that he accepted such a good disciple. In addition, he also worshipped at the door and was rejected by him. This person can't meet. Yi Xiang whispered. He didn't want Yu Fuxian to attend the Seven Palaces conference. He is too aggressive and not a good thing. Now Hua Xiang and Prince Edward in private. He even hoped that Yu Fuxian would keep a low profile, and then went to Wangcheng to find the left party to attend the Wind party. Some people are born that way. Hua Fengliu calmly opened his mouth. Not many people know Yu Fuxian's secret in this world, but he and the rest of his life know that Yu Qingdai's successor is destined to be an extraordinary person. When he plays some piano music, at that time, the temperament will be revealed. Maybe he doesn't even know it himself. Prince Luo Junlin asked Yu Fuxian to play a song for him. This world is very suitable. But this is also the first time that Yu Fuxian has exposed the spirit of the emperor, which is unintentional, not accompanied by the sound of the piano, but he was born with it. Yan Hua Fengliu could vaguely guess that Yu Fuxian was afraid of having an amazing background. I saw that at this time, in the direction of Zibai Palace, the top position, Luo Junlin's body slowly stood up. Then, everyone saw him step out, and even step down, step by step towards the center of the square, towards Yu Fuxian. People who are similar often find it easier to sense each other's aura. Luo Junlin, he is like a decisive king. Everyone in Nandu country knew that he would rule the world. At this moment, Luo Junlin felt from Yu Fuxian's body a temperament similar to his, the temperament of the emperor. The sound of the cricket reached a climax, then died down until it stopped, and Luo Junlin also came to him. Countless eyes fell on the two, Yu Xiang and Hua Fengliu even a little nervous, staring at the scene. Luo Jun, as a prince, must not be under the influence of a piano song against Yu Fuxian. Fuxian played. You follow me, I will ascend the throne in the future, you are a phase. Luo Jun looked at Yu Fuxian and said with a word, there is a dead silence between heaven and earth. Ascend the throne, you are the photo. Chapter 89, Follow the Trend. Who is the arrival of King Luo, today's prince, future king? The so-called words of Jun Wushu, Luo Junlin since he said so, must be true. Therefore, as long as Yu Fuxian nodded his head, worshipped the prince, and waited for the prince to ascend to the throne, he was a country. A youth from the East China Sea Academy who is less than 17 years old, Fendo Xiang, how noble this is, I dare not imagine. If not for my own eyes, everyone would not even believe it. Even now, many people feel a little unreal. Prince, is this crazy? Even if Yu Fu's talent is even more extraordinary, but after all, young, his future is full of uncertainty. How can he publicly promise the status of a country? Hua Huazhang sitting there was also stunned. His eyes flashed a very sharp light, but he did not speak, and did not stop. The other party is a prince, why did he stop? Chia Feng was very embarrassed. He begged Hua Xiang and His Highness to save his son Chia Fan's life today. However, at this time, the prince invited Yu Fuxian to be the future country. In his view, as long as Yu Fuxian is not a fool, impossible to refuse. In this way, won't his son Chia Fan be hit? Wu Mahong, Lin Ziyu, the strong people from Zibai Palace and the big people from Donghai City were confused. If Yu Fuxian was extraordinary, the prince's words might play a little. Luo Junlin is certainly not crazy, and he is not stupid. He felt the same temperament from Yu Fuxian, and Yu Fuxian was the man that Zhao Xiang liked. Holding Zhao Xiang's orders, the two were enough to keep him together. Think of a lot of things. What's more, he knows Zhao Xiang too much, and he knows his style of doing things well. Yu Fuxian was also very surprised. He didn't understand why a piece of the world would make the prince react so much. Your Majesty, I have many shackles now, and I can't give up everything to follow your Majesty. Can I think about it later? Yu Fuxian looked at Luo Junlin and replied. Although he didn't want to offend the prince. Luo Jun shook his head. Yu Fuxian looked into his eyes, and shouted a little, Your Majesty forgives sins. Rejected. Many eyes stared at Yu Fuxian in shock, and Fengu's opportunity to worship him, Yu Fuxian refused. The Nandu country controls 36 provinces, and each city has many cities, and the owner has great power. Already a big man. As for the country of the country, Nandu country has two people, the left side is in the palm of the hand, the right side is take over control, aspect, strength. He posed in front of Yu Fuxian at Kangzhuan Street, however, he refused. Luo Jun looked at Yu Fuxian, and said, You know the consequences of going against the king's life. Although I am not the king, I am the king of Chu. As soon as this domineering word came out, many people blacked it out. He is indeed a legendary prince and has a domineering king. If His Majesty orders, I can't refuse, Yi Fuxian replied. Seeing Yi Fuxian's eyes, Luo Junlin fell silent, and suddenly a strong pressure fell on Yi Fuxian. Suddenly, there was a smile in Luo Junlin's eyes, which made him feel like a breeze, and looked at him lightly. So, I don't want to be reluctant, back off. Thank you, Your Majesty. Yi Fuxian bowed. He looked at his back, Luo Junlin's bright eyes, there was a flash of killing thoughts, and then they turned and left. The two turned their backs on each other, walked down the square, and returned to their place. Countless eyes stared at the two figures. A strong young prince, who has appeared in the world, will inherit the throne in the future, and a young man who is proud of the sky, shows extraordinary achievements and unexpected achievements in the future. Luo Junlin returned to his position and did not sit down. His majestic eyes looked around at the people and said, "The Seven Palaces Conference at the East China Sea Academy today, I'm disappointed. Except for a few people who have extraordinary talent, the Seven Palaces disciples may only be purple. Wei Palace and Tianfu Palace reluctantly. In this way, what is the use of the Seven Palaces? From today on, the East China Sea Palace is led by Zibai Palace, plus Tianfu Palace." Sundani's words fell, and Donghai Zugong was dead. This sentence was not from the owner of Zibai Palace, not from Hua Xiang, but from Prince Luo Junlin. He has been rejected by Yi Fuxian now. Now, looking at his majestic eyes, it was faint that if someone dared raise an objection, it would be pitiful. Donghai Zugong's change was finally inevitable. Yes, Your Majesty. The two palace masters from Zibai Palace and Tianfu Palace immediately stood up and bowed. The rest of the other 5 palace masters were silent for a while, and then stood up one after another, watching the powerful prince standing there. Ode said, "Observe Your Majesty." When the prince and Hua Xiang came to the East China Sea Palace together, many people had already anticipated it. Zibai Palace was in full swing and irreversible. Now, finally here. Let's go. Luo Junlin waved, then turned and left, as if he said everything, and finished everything. Wu Huazhang got up, glanced at everyone, and then followed Luo Jun's approach. He and his entourage headed straight for Zibai Palace. Prince Luo Junlin and Huazhang walked in front, and no one dared to approach. What do you think about that matter? Luo Junlin asked Hua Xiang, who knew that the prince naturally didn't care about Zibai Gong, but he closed the leaves and fell into the sky. The hall has its own meaning, Hua Xiang asked. When he plays, he has the spirit of the emperor. Luo Junlin said lightly. Hua Xiang's eyes flashed, and he did not answer. This can only be said by Luo Junlin. He couldn't say, "I made him a photo," and his eyes had no desire of the heart, as if he wasn't interested in the picture at all. Luo Junlin sneered, "It is indeed the person that Zhao saw. Zhao Xiang's vision is indeed serious." Hua Xiangdao. How many people did Zhao Xiang excavate in the royal palace hall? Luo Jun came to the street, and the appearance of the Chinese was very sharp. He knew that the prince was telling the truth, the profession of astrologer was terrible. But Zhao Xiang never gives orders to others. Luo Junlin's appearance became sharper and sharper. This is also the reason why I came to Donghai City. This time, the people he saw may not be the same as before. What does Your Majesty mean? Hua Xiang asked. Although I am the Prince of Chu, but on the influence of Wang Cheng, the father and the king naturally do not need to say more, but apart from the father, the left is the strongest. Luo Jun said, His Majesty will one day be on the throne, not to mention that according to His Majesty, his future cultivation will not be weaker than His Majesty. For His Majesty, power is at his fingertips. Luo Jun smirked in his eyes and said, This is a nature. The throne has no end in me, but if the left is against it, it is unforgivable. Xiang Hua Xiang leaped the prince in shock. Your Majesty, the left is not too far. Hua Xiangdao. On the way to Qingzhou City on the left, apart from giving orders to Yi Fuxian, he also visited the Nandu family at the request of the Nandu family. Please go left. What else can you do? Xiang won't help those old people to count their wealth. The most outstanding young generation of the Nandu family is called Wajiayu. The day that Yi Fuxian blocked the Zibai Palace battle was to find him. They are lovers. Luo Junlin slowly said. After returning to Wangcheng, Zhao Xiang began to be in charge of next year's banquet. At the same time, he talked to his father and reused the Nandu family. You said, who is this for? Yi Fuxian and Hua Jiu. Hua Xiang's eyes twinkled, his heart was slightly cold, only he felt that the prince was more terrifying than he thought. Ha, yes, the left phase paved the way for the two younger generations, and the two younger generations are lovers. Yi Fuxian showed the imperial spirit again today. Do you still think that the left phase has no objections? Luo Junlin spoke faintly, and Hua Xiang's heart trembled. He knew that what the prince said was true, and that Zhao Xiang was an astrologer, and he must have measured the lives of Yi Fuxian and Hua Jiu. coupled with the imperial spirit revealed by Yi Fuxian, what are their lives? I thought very scared. You ordered someone to look at Yi Fuxian and the Nandu family, and then we go back to Wangcheng to see his father. Luo Junlin said weakly, and he did not tell Hua Xiang when he was in Qingzhou City, when the left phase shouted at Yi Fuxian's sister, let her daughter apologize to Yi Fuxian. Does the princess need to apologize to ordinary people? How many lives is enough for Zhao Xiang to do it? Another thing that made him even more sad, as a prince, he repeatedly invited the left side to become a teacher. The left side refused on the grounds that he did not dare to become the ruler of Chu, which means that the left side was unwilling to help him. Moreover, Zhao refuses to calculate his fortune on the grounds that his life is unpredictable. Is this a damn excuse? Taksin. Zhao Xiang, an astrologer, refused to help his prince for one reason. Zhao Xiang believed that he did not have the orders of an emperor, but he was afraid to say this. Zhao Xiang once said that the number of lives estimated by astrologers is a general trend. When conforming to the general trend, otherwise he will be stabbed and hurt himself but he does not believe that he will change his life and he is born. Wang, fate is determined by himself, but cannot be determined by heaven. In the central square of Donghai Zugong Palace, the crowd was reluctant to leave, and the seventh palace joined in. Where should they go from here? In the direction of Qiu Wakir Palace, many people gathered around Yi Xiang. He explained some things, and many people looked at him reluctantly. Wu Qiu Gongzhu Yizhang resigned from Gongzhu's position and let others intend to leave. I'm tired this whole year, and after training well in the future, my parents will take care of my daughter and my student. Yi Xiang smiled freely. Palace, isn't she his daughter-in-law? Yi Fuxian chuckled. Yi Qingshuan glanced at him, but Yi Xiang smiled and looked at the rest of his life. That's right, son-in-law is fine. The rest of his life flashed, and he looked at Yi Fuxian again, and saw Yi Fuxian showing him a low smile, as if waiting for the rest of his life to thank him. Teacher, it's almost the end of the year. Qinyuan is a big place. My romantic partner and I living there are a little lonely. How about living in Qinyuan in the future? Tang Lan said to Yi Xiang. Yun Yizhang looked at Tang Lan, and saw that the disciple was a little nervous, and couldn't help but nodded and said, okay. Tang Lan smiled brightly and said, all right, let's go. Let's go. Yi Xiang stepped forward and walked forward. Tong Yusheng and Yi Qingshuan followed. Yi Fuxian walked behind Hua Fengliu and Tang Wan, looking at the row of figures in front of him, and Yi Fuxian's smile was very bright. The scene in front of me was like a family reunion. This feeling is very good. It would be perfect if the elves and maids were also there, and he would work hard for this. Under the setting sun, a group of figures walked quickly and left the East China Sea Academy, graceful and calm. Chapter 90, Show Affection. Wukan Park, a group of people slowly fell. It was Tang Lanyi and others. Master, this was the former romantic residence, and it will be our home in the future. Tang Lan faced Yi Xiang next to her. Yi Xiang nodded, glanced back at the flowers Yi Fuxian had brought, and said coldly, I don't know where you are. Flowers smiled sadly, years of hatred. Teacher, does Senior Yi treat you like a son-in-law? Yi Fuxian muttered. Teacher and Aunt Tang had a previous relationship. Yi Xiang clearly likes this disciple, Tang Lan, and treats her as a daughter. And know the genuine attitude of the teacher. I'm not sure. I only know that if you don't shut up, my son-in-law is afraid that it has nothing to do with you. Hua Fengliu said with a smile. Yi Fuxian was dumbfounded and kept his mouth shut. Tang Wan, who was next to him, looked at Yi Fuxian with a smile, and made this person cheap. Liaobu entered Qin Garden, a light breeze blew. The environment in Qin Garden was very good. At sunset, the fallen leaves scattered on the ground, beautiful and beautiful. An old man with white hair was holding a broom and cleaning the leaves of the piano garden. Yi Fuxian glanced at him. His white hair, and the stooped body of the dog, made him stop involuntarily. What is it? Hua Fengliu asked with some confusion when he saw this scene, and Tang Wan's steps also stopped. Tang Wan, who is he? Yi Fuxian asked, and everyone walking in front stopped. Tang Lan looked back at Yi Fuxian, looked down, and saw the old man as well. The old man is in poor health and wants to find a job, so I will arrange a clean-up at Qinyuan. What's wrong? Aunt Tang, when it happened, how could I not know? Yi Fuxian asked. How did you know that you were outside every day? It should be a while after you and your teacher came, Tang Lan said casually. Oh, Yi Fuxian nodded, then smiled. It's okay. I will ask at will. He says go ahead. People look at him suspiciously, then don't think about it, and come back. Tang Lan arranged accommodation for Yi Xiang and Yi Qingshuan. Yi Xiang's wife left him very early. It was unknown if it was due to differences of opinion or Yi Xiang's nature. Yi Qingshuan is Yi Xiang alone in Wakir Palace. Big, so Tang Lan invited them to Qinyuan to be their own home. Maybe the teacher always felt the lack of home. Then, Tang Lan ordered someone to prepare dinner again. Yi Fuxian sat his teacher on the chair and saw that Yu Sheng and Yi Qingshuan were tied together. They couldn't help advancing. King Xuan, can I borrow the rest of your life for a bit? Yi Xuan looked at Yi Fuxian, wondering for the rest of his life, what's wrong? You follow me. Yi Fuxian started, and the rest of his life was followed by doubts, only to see Yi Fuxian take him back to the Qin garden entrance and look at the cleaning old man. Don't you feel familiar? Yi Fuxian asked all his life as he watched. You miss him. The rest of his life naturally understood what Yi Fuxian's familiarity meant. Possible. Yi Fuxian nodded gently. I always feel that the righteous father has been watching over us. Will. The rest of his life seemed to be talking to himself. It should be. Yi Fuxian smiled, then stepped forward. The old man saw the two coming, and shouted, two young masters. What's your name, old man? Yi Fuxian asked. Old slave, use surname. Name is not important. The old man said. Last name. Yi Fuxian flashed a sharp look in his eyes, and said, you look up and let me see. The old man slowly looked up, his cloudy eyes looking somewhat dumbfounded. He was very old, with white hair and a white beard. Yi Fuxian stretched out his hand like lightning and let go of his beard. The old man exclaimed, Sir, excuse me. Where is the slave's fault? Is that true? Yi Fuxian muttered, and then said, Grandpa Yu, I'm sorry, I thought you were my old man. It's okay, the old man waved. Grandpa Yu, can I come to chat with you often in the future? Yi Fuxian asked. It was the blessing of the old slave. The old man nodded with a smile. It's just a matter of words. Yi Fuxian smiled, and then said, Then I won't bother Grandpa Yu. He said, and left with the rest of his life. Do I feel wrong? Yi Fuxian muttered. His perception was always very sharp. Don't think too much. Yu Sheng also said, although the physique is very similar, but the appearance is completely different. How can he be a man? This man even got his old man's beard, obviously very doubtful. Yi Fuxian's eyes flickered. Did he really think about it? The two returned to the courtyard, and the banquets came to the table one after another. Elder Yi, when will the rest of my life and King Xuan work? Yi Fuxian asked Yi Xiang at the wine table. I stared at him for the rest of my life. Yi King Xuan's eyes flickered. What does he care about? Don't think about them, think about yourself. Yi Xiang looked at him. Isn't that something sooner or later? Yi Fuxian said confidently, and then looked at the flowers beside him, saying, Master, father-in-law, are you right? I thought about it again, Hua Fengliu said faintly. Yi Fuxian looked at Hua Fengliu. Teacher, where can I find a good daughter-in-law like me, still thinking about it? Come on, Tang Lan said coldly, and everyone at the table looked at this man silently. Hey, still my sister-in-law. Yi Fuxian glanced at Tang Lan. Go to your brother-in-law. Tang Lan glared at him. Don't, Aunt Tang, joke with you. You are like my brother-in-law. Yi Fuxian said weakly. Everyone looked at him silently. There is no one on this cheek. However, under the shameless Yi Fuxian, the party was like a family, enjoying the family banquet and enjoying it. No one talks about what happened at Takai Zugong. The past is like a cloud of vision. Since it's past, I won't talk about it. In a happy atmosphere, the banquet gradually dispersed, and people returned to their residences one after another. It's almost the end of the year. Yi Fuxian looked at the full moon in the air, remembering that after last year's annual banquet, the fairies came to Yefu to look for him and surprised the Yefu people. Qingzhou Lake held his hand, ridiculous unwittingly. Almost a year has passed, and this year, it seems to have experienced many. I thought for a moment, a smile appeared on Yi Fuxian's face, and it seemed that there was a little more emotion in the sound of the piano, leaving the matter behind. Under the bright moon, Qin Yin hides the acacia. The next day, the shadow came to Qin Yuan. When Yi Fuxian saw it, he showed a strange look. Does this fairy know that she misses him? I thought about it yesterday, and today I saw her coming to Qin Yuan. What are you doing looking at me like this? Hua Jiu saw Yi Fuxian strangely watching him raise his eyebrows slightly. Mei Mei looked at him. Yi Fuxian showed a smile and said, because the fairies in my family look good. Who belongs to your family? Hua Jiu glanced at his head, looking proud. Mother-in-law has assigned you to me. It can still work, so I sent a candle to the cave. Yi Fuxian smiled. Don't think about it. Hua Jiu looked at him with a smirk, then cut him off and ran to Qin Demon. Father. Yu, why are you here? Qin Mo asked. Tell me about Takai Academy, and I knew you would return to Qin Garden, so come and have a look, Hua Jiu said. Those old people speak very well. Yi Fuxian stepped forward to ask. I'm here to tell you the good news. Hua Jiu showed a sweet smile. Yi Fuxian looked at her suspiciously. The parents in the Nandu family know that I have a different and unique talent in the world, so I agreed to our marriage. Hua Jiu stretched out her hand and stabbed Yi Fuxian's waist hard. Should this person be shameless? My mother and I want you to spend the Lunar New Year together, and the owner agrees, Hua Ji said. Qin Demon's eyes flashed a strange light, seeing the two figures in front of him, and then his heart was like a mirror. It seemed that Nandao Tai knew that his disciples and daughters would be better than him in the future. This is to facilitate the relationship. Otherwise, if before, it is said that stepping into the Nandu family and stepping into the East China Sea is all trouble. Shi Fuxian naturally understands this, and the Nandu family attaches great importance to XCU. If you want to delete the old account in the future when XCU grows up, you naturally will not dare to do too much. To him, even though the Nandu family disapproved of the marriage, they were innocent. Are you happy? Hua Jiu smiled and looked at Yi Fuxian. I thought I agreed with you to marry me, Yi Fuxian said with his lips. Say happy. Hua Jiu looked at him with a smile. Yi Fuxian saw Hua Jiu's smile and nodded. Of course I can be happy with the fairy for the Chinese New Year. Hua Jiu was a little proud of her beautiful eyes. Can't I come back at night? I want to celebrate the New Year with you. Yi Fuxian blinked. Hua Jiu smiled and looked at him, then lifted his jade foot and kicked it again. New Year. This person is clearly unwell. I'm thinking about it for the teacher. How long has the teacher not seen the mother-in-law, or should I discuss it with the Nandu family's parents? Yi Fuxian said solemnly. Makes sense. Hua Jiu nodded with a smile. Father can stay, but you definitely can't. Fu Gang is weak, Yi Fuxian whispered. What did you say? Hua Jiu looked at him again. No, I wonder if we will go with Wangcheng after this year, Yi Fuxian said. Then I have to think about it, Hua Ji said. The teacher's health is bad, I'm afraid I can't take care of him, Yi Fuxian threatened. Hua Ziyu looked at him, and the flower sitting there was a little speechless, saying, You show love and show well, don't involve me every time. Father, what are you talking about? Hua Jiu's face was hot. Teacher is wise. Yi Fuxian praised him, thinking that his teacher understood them.